Second talk I'm going to give about the osteotomies involving the acetabular cell. Third, I'm going to talk about the osteotomies involving the proximal femur. These osteotomies around the hips are commonly done for many conditions. Starting from the children's, it may be a part of the treatment of hip dislocation, that is congenital dislocation of the hip, or it may be a part of the treated hip with the residual acetabular dysplasias, and problems involving the proximal femur like a coxa vara, coxa valga. Then problems in the femoral head itself, for example, coxa magna. Problems in the greater trapeze. So, for example, the trapeze is grown very highly, overriding trapeze. So, the many conditions around the hip can be tackled with the osteotomies around the hip. So, that is why to understand the surgery involved, to understand the indications and techniques, so we should know some basic aspects of the hip joint. So, why is hip joint is very, very important? Because hip joint is a classical ball and socket joint, classical synovial joint, because it fulfills all the four characteristics of the any synovial joint. So it is a second largest joint in the body, second to the knee joint. Again, it is a second most mobile joint after the shoulder. But shoulder is very, very unstable joint. The dislocation is very, very common. The hip joint gives multi-axial mobility. So the movement occurs in sagittal planes, coronal planes, and frontal planes because of the anatomical design of the joint itself. That is the reason for this multi-axial mobility. I will discuss all these things in the later. In spite of this multi-axial mobility, unlike the shoulder joint, this is a very stable joint. The stability is mainly given by the basic anatomy. That is a cup-shaped acetabulum with a soundly fitted femoral head. And somewhat the labrum, capsules, and ligaments also contributes to the stability of the joint. So because of the stability and mobility, so it supports the body weight. The entire body weight is about 70% of the upper body weight is supported by the hip joint, both in static, that is standing, in dynamic activities like walking, and also during the sports activities, it is a main weight-bearing joint. So the hip joint withstands a lot of forces. Biomechanical forces are very, very high. So that is why the fractures around the hip joint is more common. In the pathological degenerations, everything is more common. So that is why we have to understand the anatomy, because with the advent of more knowledge about the anatomies, with the advent of more advanced imaging technologies, so we are able to diagnose more and more pathological conditions around the hip. And previously, most of the groin strains, some strain in the hip joints, we used to take only X-ray. X-ray is normal. We used to treat as some strain, groin strain or joint strain. So now we know that after the understanding of the anatomy and the biomechanics, so we know what all the problems can cause a groin pain. So that we can use advanced imaging technologies like MRI and basic X-ray, so we can diagnose some more conditions. So for example, labral tear, femoral acetabular impingements are diagnosed recently more and more. So more advanced surgical treatment is available. So to utilize all these things, we should know the basic things first. So I start with the embryology, then growth and development, then anatomy in detail, and what is a normal biomechanics and the abnormal biomechanics. So coming to the embryology, I'm going just 1 or 2 slides about the embryology. So after the fertilization, the first 3 weeks after that, 4th week is a period from the limb buds forms. It is upper limb buds. Here the lower limb bud is hidden by the here the lower limb buds. Limb buds forms are the beginning of the 4th week from the lateral plate mesoderm. So at 4 weeks, that acetabulum and the femoral head is a single cartilaginous lug. So you can see the mesenchymal condensation of cells as a single mass. You cannot differentiate the head and acetabulum at 4 weeks. But at 8 weeks, the selective cell death occurs in between the femoral head and acetabulum. Then the cleft develops. It separates the femoral head from the proximal femur. We can say femoral head is a proximal femur from the acetabulum by 7 weeks. You can see in the 8th week, you can see the cartilaginous model of the proximal femur, cartilage model of the acetabulum in the intrauterine life. But around 11 to 12 weeks, the classical hip joint is fully formed with the joint space and the proximal femur and the labrum, capsule, ligament, everything is formed around the age of 11 weeks. So theoretically, the 11th week is the earliest time the hip can be get dislocated, but it doesn't happen in reality. So most of the dermatological dislocations occurs after maybe between the second trimester and third trimester. But developmental dislocation occurs more later, that is close to the birth. So again, so in around the 12 weeks, the femur head size is only 2 millimeter in diameter. The antubation is only 5 degrees. So you see the antubation actually increases in the embryonic stage. And the femoral head neck is about 150 degrees of valgus in this stage. So after the 12 weeks, it is a fetal stage. 12 weeks to till birth. So the differentiation is in the first 11 weeks is a differentiation of the basic time into the proximal femur, acetabulum, muscles, and labrum, capsule, everything differentiates. But after the 11th week, 12th week till birth, all the structures grow and mature in size. So this growth continues even after the birth. So that is why it's very important to understand the growth and development of the hip joint. So now going to the growth and development. So the growth of the acetabulum is very, very important because the growth of the acetabulum, so you see this diagram. So this is the cartilage of the growth plate of the acetabulum. This is called acetabular cartilage complex. It is composed of the triradiate cartilage medially and acetabular cartilage laterally. This is a model of the specimen after curating all the bones. So you can see only the cartilaginous triphalangeal cartilage, that is triradiate cartilage, and you can see the acetabulum cup and the lateral. So this is called common physis for the acetabulum. The interstitial, this growth is similar to the growth in the long bones. So the interstitial growth happens within the acetabular cartilage and triradiate cartilage. So that is a nearly 70 to 80% of the growth occurs in the triradiate cartilage, and the acetabular cups contributes to, the acetabular cartilage contributes to 30% of the growth. So another growth for the acetabulum is from the surrounding pelvic bones. Under the periosteum, the oppositional growth on the metaphyseal side of the acetabular cavity in the pelvic bone, under the periosteum, the oppositional bone growth happens. So that will increases the size of the acetabular cup and the thickness. Then lastly, the secondary ossification centers, which appears around the periphery of the acetabulum near the puberty, normally around the age of 9 to 10 years. So you can see here, this is the os acetabulum here in the pubic bone. This is acetabular epiphysis in the ilium and the ossification center in the ischium. All these secondary ossification center further increases the depth of the acetabulum. So the growth happens one in the common physis, second one is in the oppositional growth in the surrounding bones, third one is in the secondary ossification center. So all these three growth is genetically determined. If this genetic is affected, then there may be a possibility of getting a primary acetabular dysplasia. So that is very, very rare. The femoral head is a very, very important stimulator for the acetabulum to grow. Without the femoral head, the acetabulum will not grow. The classical example is congenital dislocation. If hip is dislocated for a long time, acetabulum will not grow in the remodel in size. So acetabular depth, acetabular diameter, everything is very, very shallow. So that is why to get the normal acetabulum, you have to reduce the femoral head as early as possible into the acetabulum so that it will stimulate the acetabular growth. So acetabular cup will form normally. Vice versa, again the proximal femur growth depends upon the compressive forces from the acetabulum. So that is why we see in the dislocated hip, the proximal femur is also the epiphysis is small, the femoral neck is more valgus, the femoral neck is more anteverter because of the compressive forces from the acetabular cup is large in a dislocated hip. So both acetabulum and femoral head growth and development is interdependent. This is very, very important when you are treating the DDH. That is why DDH management is early reduction and early reduction of the joint, which produces the normal growth in human. So, few words of the thyroid cartilage. I had already told you the thyroid cartilage forms a medial 1/3 of the acetabulum. The lateral 2/3 of the acetabulum is formed by the acetabular cup. But even though it forms a medial 1/3 of the acetabulum, but it contributes 70% of the growth. You see, the medial 1/3, but it forms 70% of the growth. It determines the depth and diameter of the acetabulum. So it is a common physis for the all the pelvic bone. There are three phalanges. One is this is anterior, this is vertical, this is posterior. The posterior phalanges is between the ilium and ischium. This is the vertical downwards between the pubic bone and ischium. This is the anterior one is between the ilium and the pubis. This is the X-ray diagram of the bone. The X-ray is taken from the lateral aspect, translateral X-ray of the acetabulum. This is the cartilage model. So the fusion of the acetabulum, the trident cartilage starts around 11 to 12 years. But most of the acetabular growth, the maximum acetabular growth is over by 8 years. The peak acetabular growth up to 4 years. After that, the acetabular growth gradually decreases, but it grows till the age of 8 years. But after that, the growth is very, very negligible. But the fusion starts only around 11 to 12 years. So that is why any injury to the trident cartilage before the age of 8 years can disturb the normal growth and development, can cause a abnormal morphology of the acetabulum. And other way, after the because of fusion occurs around the age of 11 to 12 years, all the osteotomies, all the tripelvic periacetabral osteotomies should be done after the age of 11 to 12 years because of the trident cartilage is fused at the time. This is the acetabular cartilage. I told you this is the acetabular cartilage. This is the continuation of the trident cartilage. You see the thickness of the acetabular cartilage is very, very thick. It forms a lateral 2/3 of the acetabular cup. It contributes 30% of the acetabular growth. You have to remember that it is the acetabular. So what you are seeing in the X-ray, the bony part in the neonatal children's, what you are seeing in the X-ray of the acetabulum, but the real acetabulum is more inferior because of the large cartilaginous compound. That is why the acetabular index at the time of birth or in the newborn period, if you measure the acetabular index, I think previous speaker, Dr. Ramprasad, told about the acetabular index. So it is very, very children's. It looks very high, but it is not. It is not. It is acetabulum is not shallow because of the cartilaginous compound of the acetabulum is very, very high. It is very thick. So that is why the acetabular index at the time of birth will be around 30. Later, with the growth of the acetabulum, because the acetabular growth occurs and ossification occurs on the metaphyseal side of the acetabulum, gradually the acetabular index decreases, and then it comes to around 20 degree around the age of 2 years. So coming to the growth of the proximal femur. So the growth of the proximal femur usually is not completely cartilaginous at birth. You can see here entire cartilage. You can this diagram you can see the thickness of the acetabular cartilage. This is very, very thick. That is why in a newborn X-rays the acetabular index looks very, very high because what you are seeing is only bone. The cartilage thickness is not seen. Gradually the cartilage thicknesses decreases because of the ossification happens around the acetabulum. Then you will see the thin layer of acetabular cartilage after the age of 2 years. So coming to the femoral head, the femoral head is a cartilaginous, fully cartilaginous. This cartilaginous femoral head is continuous with the neck. It is a continuity of the cartilage along the superior aspect of the femoral neck as well as on the posterior aspect of the femoral neck. Can you see here? This is a coronal section. You can see the posterior aspect of the femoral neck as well as in the superior aspect of the femoral neck. That the epiphyseal cartilage of the femoral head is continuous. And it also continues with the cartilage of the greater trapeze. So the entire cartilage. That is why in the X-ray you are not seeing the proximal femur completely. But during the entire growth of the proximal femur, the tip of the trapeze to the center of the femoral head relationship is maintained. This is very, very important. Then the ossification of the femur head starts centrally around the age of 4. Then it gradually increases centrifugally. So that around the age of 8 years, a spherical femoral head is formed. When the ossification increases, but gradually the cartilage thickness decreases. So the growth of the proximal fiber acetabulum occurs in three growth plates. One is a growth plate here. This is the proximal femoral longitudinal growth plate. It is a growth plate here. Another growth plate is along the neck. As I told here, it is in the superior and posterior aspect of the femoral neck. That is also called longitudinal growth plate of the femoral neck. So another growth is a growth plate in the acetabulum. So there are three growing areas in the femoral neck. So relative growth of all these three will ultimately relative growth of all these epiphyses ultimately determines the morphology of the proximal femur. So the growth rate of the proximal fiber contributes to 30% of the femoral growth, 10% of the lower limb growth. You see, during the growth of the proximal femur, the epiphyseal direction also changes. Around the age of 8 years, you can see the growth rate is undulated and more of varus and as well as posteriorly directed. So that is why the slip is more common around the age of 8 to 11 years, I mean after the age of 8 years and 9 years. But after the 12 years or 13 years, that you can see the epiphysis becomes more undulated, the mammillary process, everything will form. It forms a anchor between the physis and the metaphysis, so that it stabilizes the growth rate. So the slippage is very, very rare. So you can see the progressive development of the proximal femur. The proximal femoral neck isthmus, this is the articular cartilage. It continues with the epiphysis of the proximal femur, that continues with the femoral neck and the acetabulum in the superior aspect and posterior. This femoral neck isthmus, it contributes to the relative length of the neck of the femur, and also the reduction in the neck version of the neck shaft angle also due to this femoral neck physis. Coming to the growth of the trochanteric growth usually ossification starts near the growth plate, that is in the caudal end, around the age of 3 to 5 years. Then the ossification increases and progresses proximally during the cranial side. Sometimes you will see the accessory ossification center, and also it grows proximally as well as it grows laterally. Even though it is called a traction apophysis, now the recent biomechanical studies have shown this is not a traction apophysis, this is a compression apophysis, because it is compressed by the abductor muscles pulling from the origin. It is not the pulling of the trochanter, it is a compressive epiphysis. Coming to the lesser trochanter ossification usually late around the age of puberty, then infuses around the age of 3 to 20 years. So this is a traction apophysis because it is subjected to continuous traction by the iliopsoas muscle. So coming to the anatomy, bony anatomy. So the acetabulum is a three-dimensional cup-shaped structure. It's spherical all around except in the inferior aspect. The inferior aspect is completed by the transverse acetabular ligament. It is formed by the ilium, ischium, and the pubis. Ilium forms 40%, the pubis forms 40%, and ischium contributes 20% of the acetabulum. The fibrocartilaginous labrum here, it is attached to the edges of the acetabulum, which gives some stability, and the capsule is attached just above the labrum. Inside the acetabular fossa, you can see the articular cartilage. It's a lunate shaped articular cartilage. In the center of the acetabular fossa, we can see a non-articular fossa. It's called acetabular fossa, which is filled with the fibrofatty columnar and as well as the ligamentum teres. And the inferior aspect of the acetabular fossa is called the acetabular notch. Both edges of the acetabular notch gives attachment to the transverse acetabular ligament. You can see the transverse acetabular ligament here, from where the ligamentum teres arises. So coming to ligamentum teres, also called round ligament of the femur. It is attached broadly here to the transverse acetabular ligament, and it is attached to the femur in the fovea capitis. It is a non-articular portion of the femur. So this is intra-articular, but it is extra synovial because it is this entire ligamentum teres and the fat is covered with synovium. That is why it is extra synovial. So again, the ligamentum teres, it carries a blood vessel from the branch from the obturator artery, and it goes, it pierces the femoral head and supplies a small part of the femoral head, but the blood supply supplied by it is very negligible. It's insignificant. And also the ligament is not contributing to the any stability, it's only embryonic remnant, but it contains nerve supply. The branch of the obturator nerve supplies the ligamentum teres. That is why the ligamentum teres tears may be painful. So there are a lot of arthroscopic surgeons, they talk more about the ligamentum teres tears and the impingement due to ligamentum teres in a hand that in a valgus hip joint. And also the ligamentum teres is hypertrophy in congenital dislocation, developmental dislocation in untreated cases. So it is a important obstacle for the reduction of the hip joint in a DDH. So coming to the labrum is a fibrocartilaginous structure attached circumferentially around the edges of the acetabulum, but inferiorly it is continuous with the transverse acetabular ligament. Inferiorly it is attached to the both edges of the transverse acetabular ligament. So this is very, very important. It is triangular in cross section. Can you see here? It is a triangular in cross section. The base is attached to the rim. That the free border is here over the femoral head. It increases the depth of the acetabulum by 30% and also increases the surface area of the acetabulum by 20%. Very important point in the congenital dislocation of the hip. Because of the congenital dislocation of the hip, the head is outside the cup. So what happens? The ligamentum teres is infolded and also get contracted by the transverse acetabular ligament, because the transverse acetabular ligament gets contracted. So it will pull both the ends of the ligament, labrum. So that will narrow the size of the acetabular fossa. So that is why in a DDH management in open reduction, you just divide the transverse acetabular ligament. Once you divide the transverse acetabular ligament, it will release both ends. Automatically the orifice of the opening of the acetabular cup increases. Then it will facilitate the reduction of the femoral head easily into the acetabular. So what is the function of the labrum? The labrum is so you can see the labrum is all around here, and inferiorly it is a completed by the transverse. It acts as a suction seal all around the head of the femur, like a gasket. And it maintains a negative pressure within the joint so that it will resist the distraction force. In a newborn child, you cannot dislocate the femoral head even after excising the capsule. Even after you are excising the capsule and ligaments, you cannot dislocate the femoral head because of the suction seal effect and the maintenance of the negative pressure effect by the labrum. And also the labrum, because it seals the femoral head all around, it prevents the seepage of the synovial fluid from the central compartment to the periphery. So when the patient is when weight bearing is happening, the tendency is to displace all the fluid from the joint to the outside. But this labrum, it seals the periphery. So that is why it increases hydrostatic pressure. It increases hydrostatic pressure within the joint. So that will protect the cartilage from friction during loading activities. I think you all understand what I'm telling. So what happens if the labrum is gone in pathology? Labral tear is gone, then the negative suction effect is gone. Number two, the fluid is not maintained within the central compartment during weight bearing, so that the friction increases. It is due to ailing osteoarthritis. So the labrum is very, very important for the normal function of the hip joint. So coming to the femoral head, it is hemispherical in shape. 70% of the femoral disc covered by the articular cartilage. So very, very important. The articular cartilage extends beyond the limit of the acetabular labrum. So if you open the hip and neck and you see the joint, you can see the articular cartilage is overhanging the acetabular edge. So because of this acetabular cartilage, this is extending the acetabular cartilage beyond the limit of the labrum. It provides more movements because the more cartilage is available for the for the movements. The central portion of the femoral head is called the fovea capitis. It is not exactly central, it is slightly inferior and central. It gives attachment to the, is a non-articular portion, it gives attachment to the ligamentum teres. Again, the thickest articular cartilage is available in the superior aspect and the anterior aspect of the femoral head, which is corresponding to the weight bearing area during the walking. Corresponding to the weight bearing area of the acetabulum during walking. Similarly, in the acetabulum, you will see the thickest articular cartilage over the superior and the slightly posterior aspect because of the weight bearing forces during the walking. So, neck of femur. The neck of femur, what is the function of the neck of femur is it attaches the femoral head to the proximal femur. So, by attaching the femoral head to the proximal femur, it keeps the femoral shaft away from the pelvic bone, so that it allows the free movements of the hip joint. So, without the femur hitting the pelvic bone. Number two, because it gives a lever arm attachment for the abductor muscles. So, the abductor muscles is attached to the trochanter. The neck gives a lever arm so that they can act more powerfully during the movements. And another thing is the neck is smaller in diameter compared to the femoral head, so that it allows the free movement without impinging the acetabulum. So any morphological changes in the femoral neck, for example, the neck length is altered, or the neck is thickened, or some swelling in the neck, all these things will alter the, decreases the movement and decreases the lever arm power of the acetabulum and lever arm power of the abductor muscle. So what is the normal length of the neck of the femur? There is no standard because the neck length varies from the different individuals and different ethics and different individuals, and on male, female, it differs. So is there any normal length of neck of femur available? I search in literature, I'm not able to get, but indirectly we can measure, you can say it is roughly corresponds to one head diameter. So how will you measure the length of the femoral neck? Again, you can measure only indirectly by distance from the trochanter to the center of the femoral head. That is the indirect way you can measure the neck length. Coming to the neck shaft angle. So neck shaft angle, usually I told you, this is 150 degree in the embryonic stage. This is the neck shaft angle 150 degree in the 16 weeks of embryo. Then it gradually decreases to 140 degree at birth. Then it decreases around to 120, 135 degrees at the age of 2 years. By the age of 2 years, the neck shaft angle reaches the adult value. This remodeling occurs due to the weight bearing forces and the various muscle forces acting across the hip joint. So that is why the weight bearing and muscle force is very important for the remodeling of the proximal femur. So the remodeling does not happen in neurological conditions like poliomyelitis, cerebral palsy, or children who are not walking, paraplegics and quadriplegics, not weight bearing. The anteversion, the neck shaft angle does not remodel, it persistently very high. Why we should know the neck shaft angle? Because what is importance? Because neck shaft angle is altered in many pathological conditions. So, you know, it is a trauma, infection, tumors, and AVS necrosis and congenital problems. Again, to choose the implant design in trauma surgery, so we should know what is neck shaft angle. So we can, accordingly, we can select the appropriate implants. And also to plan the osteotomy and reconstructive procedure, we should know the neck shaft angle so that we can plan the exact amount of correction. Also, we can use the appropriate implants. So how to measure the neck shaft angle is very simple. Everybody know. So this is the proximal femur. So in this, you draw a circle, identify the center of the femoral head, and identify the center of the femoral neck, and connect the axis. This is the neck axis. Then you draw the center of the proximal femur. Then it is a femoral axis. Angle subtended on the middle side is a neck shaft angle. Normally it's 125 to 135 degrees. But what happens? So if the neck shaft angle is decreased, it is called a vara. It is increased, it is called valva. But measurement of the neck shaft angle changes with the rotation of the femur. So if you take the X-ray in external rotation, it will be more. Again, with the tilt of the pelvis, again the tilting of the pelvis will alter the measurement in the X-ray and the neck shaft angle, and prone position also alters. So how to measure without ideally how to measure the neck shaft angle is indirectly we can measure from the greater trochanter to the center of femoral head, which is not affected by the center of rotation. Irrespective of the rotation, the GT to the center of the femoral neck relationship is maintained. So this is coxa valga. In the top of the tip of the trapenter is below the center of the ring. It is valgus. This is normal. Coxa vara, the tip of the trapenter is higher than the center of the femoral head. So the tip of the trapenter to the head relationship is more important than the actual neck shaft angle. That is what I wanted to tell the audience. So that the neck shaft angle is not much important biomechanically, but the relationship between the trapenter and the femoral head is more important. Coming to the anteversion, this is called anterior rotation of the femoral neck in the axial plane relation to the femoral condyle. So it is usually 5 degrees. So the valgus angle decreases gradually, but see the anteversion angle actually it is 5 degrees at 11 weeks of embryo, but it increases during the embryonic life to 40 to 45 degrees at birth in the fetal stage. So again gradually decreases to 30 degrees at 1 year, then 10 to 15 degrees at the skeletal maturity. So again remodeling is happened due to the muscle forces and weight bearing happening across the joints. So in neurological conditions again, the femoral neck anteversion also will not remodel. So the lack of remodeling of the femoral neck, lack of remodeling of the acetabulum also. So anteversion and valgus and acetabular dysplasia along with the muscle imbalance is the reason for dislocation of the hip in paralytic conditions like cerebral palsy, poliomyelitis, and myopathies and everything. So clinically, how to identify the anteversion? The children walk with the internal foot progression angle. It's called internal foot progression angles. Normally, we walk with the foot progression angle of 10 degrees outside. So the foot will be like this. So now foot is turning inside. It's called internal foot progression angle. So they always sit in a W position. If you examine, they have a more internal rotation, less external rotation. So this is called excessive anteversion. So remodeling happens at till the age of 8 years. Suppose if you see a child walking with the in-toeing gait, but you can reassure that the remodeling can happen maximum up to the age of 8 years. After 8 years, remodeling is very, very less. So how to measure exactly the anteversion, I think is already spoken by Dr. Prasad. So this is axial cuts of the distal femur. This is the axial cut along the proximal femur. You lay a draw a line along the femoral condyles along the neck shaft. The angle subtended by these two lines is called a neck shaft angle in anteversion angle. Normally 15 degree, it is increasing. If this anteversion is increased, it is called increased anteversion. It is retroverted, it is on the negative side. Retroverted, they walk with a more externally rotated gait. The more externally rotated gait is due to the retroverted femoral neck. So they walk with like a outgoing gait, like a Charlie Chaplin gait. Another hip condition which will cause a outgoing gait is the hip conditions. I think it is an important exam question for the PGs. What are the hip conditions can cause outgoing gait? The one is coxa vara, developmental coxa vara, where the head is retroverted. The second one is a slipped capital femoral epithesis, chronic slipped capital femoral epithesis, where the head is completely retroverted. In both these two conditions, the walk will like a outgoing gait. And the third one is outgoing gait. You will see reasonably some amount of outgoing gait is a severe pes plano valgus. Severe pes plano valgus. They are the foot problem. But in the hip problems, these two conditions. Coming to the acetabular orientation, it is 20 degree anteverted and 40 degree inclined inferiorly. Coming to the trochanter. Trochanter, greater trochanter is very important. You see, there are different facets in the greater trochanter. One is the anterior facet. So this anterior facet, the posterior facet, and lateral and superior facet. Inferiorly, there is nothing is available here. So the trochanter to the head of the head relationship is very, very important, and the trochanter to the tip of the trochanter to the head distance is also very, very important for the biomechanical aspect. For the biomechanics. So coming to the muscle attachment, the gluteus medius is attached to the posterior and the lateral part of the lateral facets. Gluteus minimus is attached to the anterior facet. There is a blind spot here, the bald spot, where there is no muscle is attached here. That is exactly over the lateral facet. So this is used for the entry of the intramedullary nails during the trauma surgery. Coming to the lesser trochanter, I think it has some basic anatomy. Lesser trochanter is a projection in the posterior middle part of the base of the femoral neck. It immediately and proximally it continues as a femoral neck, and laterally and proximally it continues as an intertrochanteric ridge. Inferiorly it continues as a linea aspera. It is an insertion point for the iliopsoas muscle. So it is subjected to continuous tensile stresses. Suppose the lesser trochanter is overgrown, sometimes it poses impingement with it impinges over the ischial tuberosity. Calcaneal femoral adhesive. This is thick plate of bone under the lesser trochanter. It runs from the medial to lateral. In the posteriorly, it extends up to the posterior of the trochanter. It is thickest medially and thin laterally. It is basically, it reinforces the neck near the posterior middle aspect of the femur. So you can see in the X-rays, you can see the calcaneal femoral thick plate of bone here. Under the lesser trochanter, you can see the thick plate in the CT scan in the various sections. So calcaneal. This is very important. Calcaneal femoral is very important when you are doing replacement surgeries, when you are doing reconstructive surgeries for the fractures, because we have to restore this contact in the calcaneal area. We have to continuity of the lesser trochanter and the calcar should be maintained. Coming to the trabecular pattern, I think it is already spoken, some repetition. Trabecular pattern. Why the trabecular patterns are formed? In the newborn, in the children in less than 5 years, the most of the bones is primary spongious of bones, which are not arranged in a orderly fashion. Because of the proximal femur is undergo a lot of biomechanical forces like compression forces and tensile forces due to walking and during sports activities. So all these primary spongiosa, the orient to itself along the line of these forces, so that they can withstand these compressive or tensile forces in a better way. That is why this orientation is well established in the second decade of life. So this is mainly to resist the deforming forces. You can see there are 5 groups. The primary compressive groups on the middle aspect, along the it extends from the middle aspect of the femoral neck, it goes to the weight bearing portion. Again, the secondary compressive trabeculae extends from the middle aspect to the trochanteric apophysis. That is why I told the trochanteric apophysis is loaded in compression. Again, the tensile forces start from the fovea, it extends laterally to the lateral aspect of the femur and they separate the trochanteric group. So, in between the primary compression and the tensile trabeculae, you can see a radiolucent zone that is called Ward's triangle. If we see the radiolucent zone well defined in X-ray, it means the bone quality is good. So you can read the Sinks index, it is described there. Coming to the joint capsule, which inserts the acetabulum just above the labrum. It is attached to the acetabular edge of the acetabular labrum all around. And inferiorly, it is continuous with the transacetabular ligament. And in the neck, it is attached anteriorly to the intertrochanteric line here, and superiorly to the base of the neck. And posteriorly, again, it is attached to the neck of the femur. It is not attached to the intertrochanteric line. So the posterior aspect of the neck of femur is extra capsular. So it is a big point. It is not supported by the capsules and ligaments. So through which the dislocation can easily happen. So the joint capsule, there are 2 fibers, or longitudinal fibers, which orients along the line of the neck of femur, and you can see that the circular fibers, that is called zona orbicularis. It is similar to the round leg annular ligament of the radius. The circular fibers, this circular fiber is closely attached to the neck, and also it supports the labrum to increase the hoop stresses of the synovial fluid while weight bearing. That is a very important function. It reinforces the labrum to increase the hoop stresses of the synovial fluid while weight bearing. And the synovial membrane is lining the capsule underside, and also it covers the synovial membrane. The capsule is lined by synovial membrane, but the synovial membrane is also reflected over the labrum and the intracapsular portion of the femoral leg. So extracapsular ligaments. So these extracapsular ligaments are very, very important. These ligaments reinforces the capsule and runs spirally from the pelvis. You can see the orientation is twisted. Why it is twisted? Because the human being before started walking on the 2 legs, that is bipedal gait, we were walking on the on 4 limbs, that is quadruped gaits. So during the quarter, then gradually we attain the standing position. So from the quadruped position to standing position, when you attain the standing position, so these ligaments, that because of this evolution, this ligaments is got twisted. It fits spirally and it inserts the femoral head all around. So these ligaments are maximum short in extension. So that is why the ligaments gives maximum stability in extension. Coming to the iliofemoral ligament, it is inverted, that is called a ligament of Bigelow. It is an inverted Y-shaped ligament. It is attached to the anterior leg plane here along the margin of the acetabulum and distally attached to the intertrapart plane. It is an important stabilizer of the hip in extension anteriorly. There are two two partitions available. One is the medial one, lateral one. The medial one resists the anterior hip subluxation. Resists the anterior hip subluxation during extension as well as during the external rotation. The lateral one resists the internal and external rotation of the hip during the hip extension. Again, the ischiofemoral ligament, which is it is on the posterior aspect, it is trans from the ischium attached to the femoral leg. Again, it is short in extension. It prevents the internal rotation of the hip both in extension as well as in flexion. Pubofemoral ligament, it is the weakest ligament. It attaches from the pubis to the inferior medial aspect of the femoral leg. It mainly resists the hyperabduction as well as external rotation in an extension because it attaches immediately. Again, here in the see the front, there is a weak point here between the ligament of Bigelow and the pubofemoral. That is the weak point. Through these weak points anteriorly and under the another weak point I told on the posterior aspect, the traumatic dislocations commonly happen. So muscles, I'm not going to talk more about the muscles because it is a very extensive topic. The muscles give stability to the hip during dynamic activities. During a quiet standing, the muscles are not contributing much to the stability. And the contraction of the muscles gives forces and it produces a wide range of movements. The muscle generates the forces across hip joints. So the muscle forces can increase the joint reaction force up to the 6 times the body weight. This is very important when the morphology of the proximal femur is affected. So primarily the abductor muscle group is an important stabilizer of the hip during the gait. Again, the tensor fasciolata, the another important function of the tensor fasciolata. The tensor fasciolata acts as a tension band, a lateral tension band on the lateral aspect of the femur to resist the bending forces. Somewhat this prevents a stress fractures in the older age group because of the tension band activities of the tensor fasciolata on the lateral aspect. So the muscle weakness usually comes in by the body to prevent the imbalance. For example, the abductor muscle weaknesses can cause a trunculumbar tilt. For example, the abductor of this muscle is weak, the body tilts to this side, so the balance is maintained. Again, the gluteus maximus, the body tilts posteriorly, gluteus maximus gait. So the center of the mass falls within the base of the legs. So coming to the blood supply is mainly from the superior gluteal arteries, which supplies the superior and posterior portion, the inferior gluteal artery, which supplies the anterior and inferior portion of the acetabulum, and the obturator artery, which supplies the non-articular portion of the acetabulum. The blood supply of the femoral arteries, I'm going to talk in detail. So the femoral blood supply basically from the 5 blood vessels. The medial circumflex femoral artery and lateral circumflex femoral artery from the front of femoris artery. Then obturator artery, which goes along the round ligament of femur, and some contribution from the superior gluteal arteries and inferior gluteal arteries. All these arteries forms a anastomosis around the trochanter. That is called a extracapsular arterial ring. You can see here the lateral circumflex femoral artery and the medial circumflex femoral artery, along with the superior gluteal arteries, inferior gluteal artery. There forms rich anastomosis around the femoral leg. It is called the extracapsular arterial ring. In the extracorporeal arterial ring, the most important blood supplies arising from the medial circumflex femoral artery on the posterior aspect and the lateral aspect of the proximal proximal neck. So the posterolateral aspect of the proximal femur is very, very important. So that is why when you are putting instruments, we should avoid this posterolateral, means superior and the posterior aspect of the femoral neck. So avoid putting instruments in the piriform fossa in the superior aspect, in the posterior aspect of the neck. So because it will damage the blood supply here. So all this capsular ring, extracapsular ring, from the extracapsular ring, the retinacular arteries arises. These arteries pierces the capsule at the level of the intratrochanteric line. Here, the pierces the capsule here in the femoral neck. These arteries are called retinacular arteries. These are superior anterior retinacular arteries, then posterior superior retinacular arteries, and posterior inferior retinacular arteries. So the anterior retinal arteries arising from the lateral circumflex femoral artery. The rest of the superior and inferior and the posterior retinal arteries arising from the medial circumflex femoral artery. So the blood supply from the lateral circumflex femoral artery is very, very small amount. So at the level of the all these arteries ascends in the under the subsynovial layer in the femoral neck, ascends under the subsynovial layer of the femoral neck, and at the junction of the cartilage and neck junction, that forms another arterial ring. It's called subsynovial arterial ring of tongue. Then from there, numerous vessels enters the femoral head and supplies the entire femoral head, and small amount of blood supply is contributed from the artery of the ligamentum teres from the obturator artery. So the blood supply is different in different age groups. This is very important. It is less than 4 years, because of the growth rate is not well established. So the most of the blood supply arises from the medial circumflex femoral artery, which gives us lateral epiphyseal vessels and the metaphyseal vessels. The metaphyseal vessels and lateral epiphyseal vessels from the medial circumflex femoral artery is important blood supply in less than age group of 4 years. The lateral epiphyseal vessels which penetrates the cartilage in the neck. As I told you that the superior portion and posterior portion of the femoral neck is cartilaginous, continues with the cartilage of the femoral head. So here they penetrate the vessels in the cartilage and also supplies the most of the femoral head. And metaphyseal vessels also penetrates the physeal plate, because physeal plate is not well developed in less than 4 years. It easily penetrates the physeal plate and supplies the small inferior portion of the femoral head. But what happens between the 4 to 8 years, the epiphyseal growth rate is well established. So it prevents the metaphyseal vessels from penetrating the physeal. So what happens, only the epiphyseal vessels which travel through the neck cartilage, it supplies the most of the blood supply. The lateral epiphyseal vessels is only blood supply between the age of 4 to 8 years. Again, after the age of 8 years, what happens? The ligamentum teres blood supply is well established. Before the 8 years, the ligamentum teres is not well established. After the age of 8 years, ligamentum teres blood supply is well established. That will supply some portion over the inferior aspect. So, superiorly it is supplied by the epiphyseal vessels, inferiorly it is supplied by the vessels from the ligamentum teres after the age of 8 years. Once at maturity the growth rate disappears, the subsynovial ring is formed and the vessels directly penetrate the femoral head at the head neck junction and supplies the entire femoral head as I described earlier. So the neck of femur fractures, it is completely disrupted across area. So coming to the nerve innervation, so there are 3 structures that nerve supply. One is capsule, another is labrum, and ligamentum teres. The capsular innervation is described by the Kamba et al. He described it in relation to the phase of the clock. For example, the 6 o'clock position is the acetabular fossa, that is a acetabular notch inferiorly. So just remember that the 6 o'clock is corresponds to the transverse acetabular ligament. So that is a 12 o'clock position. So there are a lot. These are the nerve supplies. The superiorly and posteriorly the sciatic nerve and the superior glottal nerve, and again superior, posteriorly and inferiorly nerve the quadratus femoris and inferior nerve, and anteriorly, inferiorly the femoral nerve and the obturator nerve, accessory nerve. But this is a relatively nerve-free zone between the 1 to 230 zone. This is very important when you are doing arthroscopic surgery because we can enter without damaging the nerve supply. So this is this nerve supply to the capsule. So again, the labrum doesn't have any nerve supply, but it got the free nerve endings and the nociceptive receptor. So it carries the pain from the impingement of the proximal femur. And ligamentum teres is supplied by a branch of the obturator nerve. So any tears or impingement of ligament teres also causes pain. So the pain is coming from the capsule, pain is coming from the labrum, pain is coming from the ligamentum teres. Previously, we used to thought that any groin pain is due to the muscle strain. So now we know there is a what all the structures can cause pain. So having understood the anatomy, we go into the biomechanics. Thiru,
சொல்லுங்க.
Definition of the biomechanics. So biomechanics is a study of the mechanical laws and forces relating to the movement or structure of the living organisms or human beings. This is the biomechanics. So from the anatomy and development, we know that the hip stability is contributed by the depth of the bony acetabular saccades, which is slightly lesser than the hemisphere of the femoral head. This is very, very important. Again, the fibrous, the tough labrum, it gives stability and capsular ligaments and powerful muscles, which gives stability during the dynamic activity. Again, I told you mobility of the proximal femur is possible because of the ball and socket design of the joint and the femoral neck diameter, because which is narrower than the femoral head. That is why it allows a more range of motion without any impingement. And the femoral neck length is also important because it takes the shaft away from the pelvis and facilitates a free range of motion without any hindrance from the pelvic bone. So any short femoral necks decrease the range of motion. So normal hip is very stable and very mobile, but the biomechanics starts here because of the hip joint is the link between the locomotor and the passenger. The locomotor is a lower limb and the passenger is the body. So it withstands the various forces across the hip joint. So any abnormal anatomy, whether it involves a head, acetabulum, or neck length, neck height, trochanteric, trochanter article, trochanteric distance, everything, if anything is altered, which alters the forces across the hip joint, that causes pathology and early osteoarthritis. That is why we should understand the normal biomechanics of the hip joint. Before going to biomechanics, I think we should understand what is a passenger and what is locomotor unit. So passenger is consists of head, neck, trunk, and the upper limbs, and the entire spine. That is a passenger. The locomotor is both lower limbs, starting from there are 11 joints in the locomotor system. The lumbosacral junction, the hip, knee, ankle, subtalar, and MTP joint. The pelvis is a dual role because it acts as a base of the passenger as well as the pelvis acts as a link between the two locomotor systems. So the hip joint is the important link. The hip joint is the important link between the passenger and the locomotor system, over which the entire passenger rides. You can compare to the motorbike. The hip joint is a hip joint at the both lower limbs is a motorbike. That the entire the passenger is riding over the hip joint and it travels. It progresses while walking, standing, and all the other activities. So the amount of forces acting across the hip joint is very, very important. So the passenger, which considers 70% of the total body weight, the passenger considers 70% of the total body weight. The locomotor system, which contributes 30% of the body weight. So the both locomotor system 30%. So each locomotor system is only 15%. So as I told you, pelvis plays a dual role. So what happens during a standing and walking? What happens the center of gravity? This is very important. We should understand what is the center of gravity. So in human beings in a standing, for example, this is a 184 centimeter individual. In this individual, 6 feet average 6 feet human being, the center of gravity is exactly situated in the front of the feet and vertebrae. exactly just in front of the T10 rebar. That is well above the base. The base is here. It is well above the base. That is about 33 centimeters from the hip joint. So this center of gravity should be maintained between the basal support during standing and also during walking, so that our balance is maintained while standing and walking. So during the quiet standing, we always, when you are quiet standing, we normally tend to shift the body weight from the one leg to the other leg. Slightly, we used to wobble the body. We shift the body weight to one leg to the other leg. During the quiet standing, what happens? The center of the gravity, it is in between the ear canal. You can see there is a ear canal here. It is in between the ear canal. It comes in front of the thoracic vertebra and slightly comes in front of the sacrum, that is lumbosacral junction S2, and comes down. It is slightly posterior to the hip joint. So it produces an extension moment here. It comes anterior to the knee joint. Again, it causes an extension moment in the knee joint. And just in front of the ankle joint, that is 5 centimeters in front of the ankle joint, because this ankle joint is not a center of the foot, because the center of the foot is exactly 5 centimeters from the center of rotation of the ankle joint. So while quite standing, because our foot is 3.5 inches separated, and our leg is 7-degree outtoed. It is 7-degree outtoeing is there. We don't. So in this standing, so the center of gravity falls in between the two legs, slightly towards the more weight-bearing leg. So the passive stability during standing is in the hip and knees provided by the body vector, basically the body vector, because I told you body vector, that the center of gravity vector passes posterior to the hip joint here. It produces extension moment, anterior to the knee joint flexion, that is the extension moment here. So this extension moment is promoted in the opposite side by the ligament of Fischello. Again, this extension moment is promoted by the strong posterior oblique ligament in the posterior of the neck of femur. So both these ligaments are locked in extension during quiet standing. So this is a very important function of the center of the gravity. So our gait, bipedal gait, is less efficient because of the center of, as I told earlier, the center of gravity is above the base of support. So it is less efficient. So we have to maintain the center of gravity. The center of gravity should fall within the basal support, within the narrow basal support during the standing and walking activities, so that our mechanism is less efficient and less stable compared to the animals who have got a quadruped gaits, because the base of the center of the gravity falls under the trunk within the base. Here the base center of the gravity passes above the basal support. Here it is below the trunk and below the basal support. And also that the trunk is placed between the proximal, forelimbs and the hind limbs, and the trunk muscles are extensively used by the animals. But in the human body, the trunk muscles are not used during walking and standing, because it is only useful for balancing the passenger unit. It is not helpful for walking. Even the arm swing is not essential for the walking. The biomechanical studies have proved that even if you tie the both arms, the person can walk normally. So what happens during walking? When the one leg is taken away from the ground, the center of the gravity moves towards this side. During the unsupported side, the center of the gravity moves because of the body weight borne by the supporting leg is combination of the upper body weight as well as the body weight of this leg. So the center of gravity automatically shifts to the unsupported leg. So to balance the pelvis dropping down, what happens? Hip joint abductor muscles will contract. The contraction of the hip joint requires a fulcrum. So the fulcrum and as well as a lever. The fulcrum and lever produces a strong contraction here that will lift the pelvis up and maintains the central gravity within the base control, so that the balance is maintained, so we are not destabilized during walking. So the hip joint basically requires the power and lever as well as fulcrum to balance the body weight during the swing phase. The power is abductor muscle. The lever is the femoral neck length. Power is the abductor muscles which is attached to the trochanter. The lever is the femoral neck and length. And the fulcrum is the hip joint, the stable hip joint. So this is a lever mechanism. Our body is composed of multiple levers. Our musculoskeletal system works basically upon the system of levers. The biomechanics of so you should understand the lever biomechanics before you understand the biomechanics of the human body. So what are the types of levers described in the physics? There are three types of levers. The first class lever, for example, the first class lever, the fulcrum is in the center and the effort is on one side and load is on the other side. Classical example of first class lever is seesaw. The children choose to play in the play area. So that is a fulcrum here, and the load and weight is on the load and force on the either side. So if the load and force is equal, it is balanced. Suppose if the load is higher, it is imbalanced. Again, if the lever arm length is altered, again it causes imbalance. Coming to the second class lever and third class lever, when both the second class and third class lever, the fulcrum is on the one end. The efforts and loads are away from the fulcrum. But in the second class lever, the load is nearer and effort is more far away from the fulcrum. For example, is a wheelbarrow is used to lift the weight. Here, you can see that this is a pivot, that is a load. Whatever the sand or mud we put it load, that is the effort. So we used to lift this. The effort is used to lift this handle. Using the fulcrum, the load is transmitted easily. So again, coming to the third class lever, here the load is at the end, the effort is close to the pivot. Classical example in the human beings are the arm, the biceps acting on the proximal radius. I'm not going to detail. Biceps acting on the proximal radius is a classical example of a third class lever. So the another common example of third class lever is a fishing rod. You can fishing rod, that is the fulcrum. There is a pivot. The effort is produced here and the load is a fish. The effort is produced here and the load is that is a third class lever. The hip is a first class lever. So you can compare the lever to the seesaw of the seesaw biomechanics. It's a first class lever. But here you can see here the fulcrum is the hip joint. Fulcrum is the hip joint. The load on the one side is a body weight and the force is the abductor muscle. The only thing is that the length lever arm is difference in the hip joint. Here the seesaw, the lever arm on the both sides is equal. Length lever arm is different. So the mechanical advantage depends upon the related length of the lever arm. Here it is mechanically not advantage, it is a disadvantage is question. Because the lever arm of the effort is very, very larger compared to this lever arm. So that the effort has to be more to maintain the balance. So what are the forces acting across the hip joint in a single while the leg is standing and the single leg standing? One is the body weight here, as I told here, the body weight. That is the body weight is a combination of the weight of the passenger unit and the unsupported leg. That is 70% plus 15% of the one leg. That is 85% of the body weight is acting on the middle aspect. And abductor muscles acting on the opposite side of the fulcrum. So joint reaction forces. So the abductor muscles act. So the joint reaction forces, the compressive forces between the femoral and the acetabulum, in order due to the balancing act of the abductor muscles to prevent the pelvis from dropping down. So the joint reaction force is joint reaction force is the compressive forces across the hip joint due to the balancing effect of the body weight and as well as abductor force. So the body weight and abductor force had to in a such a way that, so that the pelvis on the unsupported leg is not dropped. So to maintain the level pelvis. So the joint reaction force is equal to body weight force as well as abductor muscle force. Joint reaction force is equal to the body weight force on the middle side and abductor muscle force on the lateral side. Because of the lever arm is different. I'll come to the details later because this is when the child when he's standing on the both legs, the center of gravity passes in the center, so the body weight passes equally on the both sides. The resultant compression force are vertical, so that no muscle action is needed when we are standing on the both legs. Each body carries a 1/3 of the body weight. Each hip carries a 1/3 of the body weight, equally distributed on the both sides. The resultant compressive vectors are vertical, so the more muscle action is needed to balance the body weight. What happens in a single stance phase? This is a standing leg. This is a swinging leg. So the body weight. So the body weight is now equal to the body weight of the passenger. That is the head, neck, trunk, and the pelvis plus weight of the unsupported leg. So that is the total body weight. Because of the body weight is more, what happens? The center of gravity shifts slightly to the outer side. So to prevent this, abductor muscles work. It creates the momentum force using the hip joint as a fulcrum in the opposite direction. So this downward direction, it produces in the other way direction. It pulls the pelvis and to keep the level to prevent the pelvis from dropping down. But the abductor lever arm length of the abductor, that is A, is smaller than the lever arm length of the body weight lever arm, body weight lever arm. So this is abductor lever arm, this is the body weight lever arm. So the ratio between these two is roughly corresponds to 3. The B is 3 times the A. So the abductor force required is equal to 3 times the body weight. To understand this, so the abductor muscles has to work 3 times the body weight to prevent the pelvis from dropping down. So that is 3 times the body weight to prevent the pelvis from dropping down. So the joint reaction force is combination of the abductor force, that is 3 times the body weight, plus the center of the gravity body weight. Then joint reaction force is equal to 4. So the total joint reaction force in a standing phase on this side is 4 times the body weight. So it depends upon the relative lever arm length. The lever arm length of the abductor muscle is A, the lever arm length of the abductor muscle is B. That B is 3 times A. So the abductor muscle has to work 3 times the body weight. So the moment created by abductor muscle 3 times the body weight. The joint reaction force is a combination of the abductor muscle moment as well as the body weight moment. So you add both abductor moment and body weight moment, then it is equal to 4 times the body weight. So joint reaction forces act across the hip joint. So having understand the normal biomechanics, what is happening in a coxa brevia? The coxa brevia, the femoral neck length is short. So the lever arm length of the abductor mechanism is reduced. The shortened lever arm causes the more forces. The abductor mechanism has to work more forcefully to prevent the pelvis from dropping down. So I can explain it in another way. For example, this is a door. This is a fulcrum. This is a lever. This is a handle. So now I can open the door and push the door. For example, if the carpenter is place the handle on this side, this is a fulcrum, then you need a lot of force to open because of the short lever arm, we need a lot of force to open this door. Another example is a cricketer. because cricketer he can hit the ball into the six with the force because of the length of the bat, because of the long lever. Suppose we give the short bat, you will not be able to create the force and you will not be able to hit the ball. So the biomechanics in coxa vara, that is a reduced length of the lever arm, but our abductor muscle has to work more and more. More abductor muscle force is required, so that will increase the joint reaction force. So the more compressive forces is acting across the hip joint. And ultimately, it causes a fatigue failure of the abductor muscle. Later on, if the child continues to walk, they develop a fatigue failure of the abductor muscle. So what is the biomechanics in coxa valga? The coxa valga, you see the trochanterus at a slightly higher level. Greater trochanter is slightly higher level, and also greater trochanter is shifted close to the center of the femoral head. The greater trochanter center of the femoral distance is reduced. So there is a reduced abductor lever arm here. You can see the reduced abductor lever arm is reduced. So relative ratio between the abductor lever arm and the body lever arm is increased. The ratio. This is the normal hip. The relative ratio is 1:3. So the joint action force is 3 + 1 is 4. Here the relative ratio of the abductor lever arm and the body mechanics lever arm is 1 + 6. Because this is reduced, the ratio is increased. So the joint action force is 7 times the body weight. So increase the joint action force in coxa valga. So what happened in coxa vara? See the trochanter is at a higher level. The lever arm distance is again increased. In coxa vara, the lever arm distance is actually increased. So because of the lever arm length is increased, the ratio between the body weight lever arm and abductor lever arm is decreased. That is 3. So it ultimately decreases the overall joint reaction force and causes abductor inefficiency and truncal mobility. So what happens if we give a walking stick? For example, if we used to give walking sticks whenever the patient is having pain in the hip joint, how the walking stick decreases the biomechanical force across hip joint. So when the walking stick is used on the opposite side, the part of the body weight is transferred to the walking stick. That is one mechanism. So the momentum created by the body weight is decreased. Another one is the walking stick creates a counter torque force in the opposite direction by the contraction of the latissimus dorsi. It gives a counter torque force in this direction, so that will help the abductor muscles on the opposite side to balance the pelvis. So ultimately it reduces the joint action force here and the pain is decreased. Again, similarly, the limping is also helpful to decrease the joint action force. You have seen that all the persons who the painful condition, they use limp by swinging the body towards affected side. What happens when we shift the body towards affected side? The center of gravity moves close to the midline. Center of gravity moves us closer to the center of the femoral head. You can see here the center of the femoral head closer, so that it decreases the body weight movement across the hip joint. Because this is decreased, the amount of force required by the abductor muscles is also decreased to balance the pelvis from dropping down. So ultimately it decreases the joint action force and it decreases the pain. The similar biomechanics happens in the coxa vara also. Coming to this is all what we have seen is a lever arm length problems. Coming to the rotational problems in the lever arm. For example, this is the transverse section of the femur seen from the above. In the normal individual, normally rotated hip, the gluteus maximus is directly attachment of the gluteus maximus is directly lateral to the femoral head. So that that the contraction of the gluteus maximus produces only the abductor moment. So this is only abductor lever. So what happens if there is increased antivation? If the increased antivation is compensated by the increased, in-toeing gait or foot progression angle, then somewhat it is compensated by the in-toeing gait and foot progression angle, then this mechanism is not altered. Suppose the compensation is inadequate, If they are not able to compensate by intowing the foot fully, then the anteversion of the femoral neck produces secondary moment. What happens is the abductor mechanism and the insertion point is moved posterior. That is the gluteus maximus. The insertion point from this dead lateral aspect, it moves posteriorly here. So in addition to the abductor moment, it produces a extension moment as well as external rotation moment to the gait. That is a secondary muscle function of the gluteus medius. So it produces extension moment and external rotation moment to the gait. Then it becomes gait is very inefficient and they are limping. Coming to the problems in the fulcrum. The fulcrum is at the hip joint. The stable fulcrum is very, very important for the abductor mechanisms to contract and prevent the body from shifting. The fulcrum is affected in acetabular dysplasia and the subluxation as well as in dislocated femoral head. So it is here that because of the fulcrum is more laterally, the abductor muscle contracture, instead of producing abduction, it produces an upward moment. It produces shearing force here. Again, here in this side, it is a coxa valga. So the abductor moments increases the reaction forces, joint reaction forces on the left side. So both the hips are treated by varus erodation, varus osteotomies, and right hip is treated by periacetablar osteotomy. The center of rotation and fulcrum is restored, and the trochanter to the center of the head distance is restored, so that the balance is maintained. So why we should understand all these biomechanical principles of the acetabulum and the femoral neck is because most of the osteoarthritis of the hip is caused by the secondary problems. Such problems occurs especially moreover in the children's period. That is one which is responsible for the osteoarthritis. In 90% of the cases, osteoarthritis is secondary arthritis due to the pre-existing problems in the children. Only 10% is a primary osteoarthritis, like inflammatory arthritis or infective arthritis. So osteoarthritis is caused by acetabular dysplasia, which is a problem in the fulcrum. Femoral dysplasia, which is a problem in the liver. That the femoral dysplasia means coxa vara, coxa valga, coxa brava, and everything. And of course, we talk more about the femoroacetabular impingement, which is a problem in the femoral neck geometry. So all these problems all these problems are mechanical problems, which causes abnormal reaction. So the pathophysiologist way is abnormal morphology, altered biomechanics, the focal loading of the articular cartilage, which leads to cartilage degeneration and osteoarthritis. So the osteotomies are only basically to correct the biomechanics. So we have to correct the morphology. That is a labrum, you have to correct the fulcrum, the joint you have to correct, and the neck length you have to correct. So correction of the biomechanical forces reduces the joint action forces across hip joint, so that it preserves the existing cartilage or it prevents the cartilage from getting degenerated. So that is why it relieves the pain and improves the function, so that we can delay or prevent osteoarthritis and improves the gait, so that the native femoral head is maintained for the long period of time. So this is very important to understand it. That is why it's very important to understand the normal and the abnormal biomechanics of the hip joint. I think that is the end of the talk. I don't know how many people understood the biomechanics.
Suresh, hello.
Yes.
And in coxa vara, the horizontal offset is increased actually. So in hip replacement, we want only we don't want a varus positioning of the femoral component. So, but there is a small confusion. Even I do not know that correct answer. See, according to this biomechanics,
Rambi, one nimisham. Illa. See, when there is a coxa vara, what happens is the length between the neck and the trochanter increases. But what happens is the abductor length will shorten. Because there has to be an abductor length. Only then the abductor will function normally. Because as per the Starling's law, there has to be length of the muscle fiber. Only then the abductor will be efficient. Suppose you reduce the abductor length, the length of the abductor muscle, then the abductor will not function properly and it will get fatigued early. So that is the reason why we need, Chandley also did a trochanteric osteotomy and you push the trochanter down. So just to increase the abductor length. So the problem with the coxa vara is the abductor inefficiency. And also there will be impingement more than 90 degrees if you want to abduct, not more than 90 degrees. You want to do abduction, the trochanter will hit against the pelvis and there will be a restricted range of motion. So that is the reason why we don't want to have a coxa vara. So coxa valga, it cannot be too much of a coxa valga. Then the joint reaction force will be very high. So it has to be an optimum neck shaft angle, but definitely a lower neck shaft angle will cause abductor weakness and it will cause abductor lurch, and definitely the joint reaction forces will be altered.
I would like to look at this in another angle, actually, another point of view. As you said in Cox, suppose we are keeping the femoral implant in varus position. So what we are doing by that is we are acutely altering the tension in the abductor muscle. That means what happens is acutely we are converting a optimally stretched abductor into a lax abductor. For example, the gluteus medius, you can take it. So when you are doing a total hip, you are keeping the femoral component in varus position. Means suddenly what happens is the trochanter goes up. That is upraiding trochanter. Because of that, the gluteus medius will become lax. So in that situation, as you said, the lax gluteus medius will not be able to hold the pelvis in the ipsilateral side. So in that case, there will be a lurch to the opposite side. And in order to correct that lurch, the patient will have to sway to the ipsilateral side. So in that way, the varus positioning of the component reflects on the biomechanics of the hip. This is what we are talking about, acute correction. In total hip replacement, what you are doing is acute conversion of normal into varus. Whereas in a child, the story is different. The child grows with the varus. The abductor muscles also grow with the varus. And in that situation, the tension, abductor tension is going to be different.
No.
That is the answer for
abductor tension. Abductor tension child growing doesn't mean that it will be normal. No, it's not like that. It's not a chronic wasting. Why there is a Trendelenburg gate in Perthes? Why there is a Trendelenburg gate in Perthes? Tell me why there is a Trendelenburg gate in Perthes disease. When there is a coxa vara in Perthes, why there is a Trendelenburg gate?
There the abductor length is decreased.
That's what I'm telling. When the abductor length is decreased, the power arm will be lost. The power arm will be less.
The more the muscle is stretched, the better the performance.
Yes.
If the muscle is not stretched much and if it is shortened, moreover, because of the coxa vara in a child, the abductor muscle length is shortened when compared to a normal child's abductor. So since the short muscle will have to perform more, that means the energy spent on contracting a shorter muscle to create the same joint reaction force is more.
Correct.
That is why the child goes for lurch. There is no question of laxity.
Laxity na sollala. See, I never said laxity. The abductor will not have sufficient length to exert power. See, it is directly proportional to Starling's law. The length of muscle tension is directly proportional to the length of the muscle fiber. Okay, so it needs an optimum length for it to function, for it to efficiently function. So definitely, even if it is a child who grows with a varus, the abductor will not be as efficient as it was supposed to be. So definitely they will develop a Trendelenburg gate. So I think that is the actual reason why in a coxa vara there is a problem with the inefficient functioning of the hip, because there is a power arm problem here.
Power arm problem in a gradually developing situation is because of shortened muscle. Whereas the power arm problem in
both are different situations.
Is because of laxity. Both are different.
Both are different situations, but ultimately both will have correct. True. That is true.
Biomechanics is the same.
Yeah, I think PGs will have a lot of questions to ask.
There was a question raised. Joint reaction force is decreased in coxa vara.
Yes.
Which is better? Joint reaction force increase is better, or joint reaction force decrease is better for the longevity of the joint.
But the cartilage function, I don't know, even I have a doubt. But the cartilage, the decrease of the cartilage joint action force increases, it has more degeneration, I think.
Ama. So whether you mean to say that which side to err then? See, when we are doing a total hip replacement, we want to, suppose we want to err on one side. You want to increase the joint reaction force by creating valga, or you want to decrease the joint reaction force by creating vara. So that was one question.
Avoid varus.
We want to avoid varus. We want to avoid varus. But there,
even normal valgus, avoid varus.
Whether we should we reason out with this concept of joint reaction force, yes, or the other concept of the abductor muscle
length. Yeah, that is true.
So, actually what they say is abductor efficiency is, given preference over your joint reaction force.
No,
slight valgus.
The abductor muscle will length, the one point. So without changing the valgus and varus neck, we can restore the abductor length by transferring the trochanter.
That's what Chanley did.
Yes.
That's what Chanley did.
Transfer the trochanter so that the abductor, the neck shaft angle is not altered.
Yeah, that's what exactly what Chanley did. நீங்க சொல்றது அதுதான் trochanteric osteotomy. But slight valgus will not alter the joint reaction force to that extent. Maybe. So slight valgus, அவர் சொல்ற valgusலாம் is too much of a valgus.
It is a balance between the varus and valgus, I think.
Yeah, அந்த இதுல it has only varus definitely will not be accepted. Not accepted.
Yeah.
So PGs, you have any doubts? I know it's a very tough topic.
Because of the unstable situation, because of the abductor muscles weak. You can put
definitely it abductor lurch.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, the increased antiversion இருந்தா the abductor force how it affected? I understand that means. Can you repeat it, sir?
I'll repeat again.
I think he has to go to that slide. Yeah, when there is this normal antiversion, the abductor and the trochanter, yes, gluteus medius attachment and the trochanter are in same line. They are in same line. Whereas when there is an increased antiversion, it goes posterior. So the gluteus medius has to exert more pressure because it has to go posterior. It causes external rotation and extension. That's what he said.
Yes, exactly. Provided that the compensation given by the foot progression angle is not complete. Suppose if the patient is walking with completely internal rotated gait, then the entire antiversion is compensated. So if you see the hip from the top, the abductor mechanism and the tip of the trochanter lies in the same level. Suppose the compensation is not complete. Suppose the antiversion is 45 degree, he is able to internally rotate the foot by 20 degrees. So he's got a 20-25 degree compensation. The remaining 20 degree of antiversion is not compensated. Then in that situation, this is the problem in the lever arms. So that because of the attachment goes posteriorly, so it creates a extension component as well as an external rotation component to the abductor mechanism.
Yeah, okay, sir. Understood, sir.
You understand, no?
Yes, sir. Understood, sir.